Nigeria. Very good. I would be either in Nigeria or in Indonesia, very anthropological, obviously, doing research far away in other countries, and doing research on militias. And I just posted 2 pictures here of the type of groups that we would usually be working with. The picture on the left is taken by my colleague Adam Higazi. That's a picture in the north of Nigeria, a group that is fighting against or guarding against Boko Haram. The group on the right is in Indonesia, in Sulawesi, an organization that works on anti-terrorism and security issues over there. Obviously, I'm not there. I'm at home. This is my working room in the Netherlands. And yeah, now I need to work from here, as all of you do. Maybe Nanke, you go next. Oh, apparently, sorry, there's this first. Obviously, yeah, as with everybody, I had the choice of either moving online or not doing anything at all. Luckily, in the world of today, it's quite possible to do a lot of things online, also because the COVID measures that we are confronted with are also in place in the countries that I would be working in. So, in the large part, the research communities that I would be working with are also online, and they have their meetings online now. They also use Zoom. They also use make more use of WhatsApp and so on. So to some extent, I can still continue what it was that I was doing. Obviously not everything, but in part, I'm happy to say that a lot of my research has been going on, and I'll say a bit later as to how and what in a minute or two. But another thing, because you probably have the same thing, sitting at home all day talking to your computer is fun for the first few weeks, but at some point it gets very dull. And I found that, well, actually this is a very unique situation we're in. How often do we have a crisis like this, and a crisis in which we even are apart, but conditions are still mostly relatively safe? And I live in Utrecht. I have an open market in front of my house 3 days a week. So basically, I incorporated that in the situation by looking into how people interact on that market under COVID conditions. I'm doing my shopping there anyway, so looking around and talking a bit to people is something that does not make much of a difference. But I've been doing that for the past half year or so, and yeah, so I kind of started a research project coming out of the situation that I was confronted with. That's it for these slides.
Okay, then I go on with my introduction, and after that there is a moment for asking questions. So I had a similar situation as Laurens, because I was supposed to do my VENI project in Bogota at this moment, where I was going to research how urban development processes are increasingly more participatory, but also how that participation of citizens then leads to new conflicts. Here is a very nice pictures of Fenna, made by Fenna, who was my student assistant in the preparation of this project. So I had to adjust, because one of the ideas was that I would start in Bogota and really start learning from the Global South, and to see how they do things that we in the Global North think we are super good at, namely citizen participation in urban development processes. But of course, I couldn't start any longer in the Global South because, yeah, I couldn't go there to do my ethnographic fieldwork. So I had to really swap the whole logic of the project, but also then, the way that I did my participant observations, because of this situation, I started in the end working on my case study in Amsterdam. So let's go to that case study. So in this case study, I found a participatory process in which citizens were first for a year and a half included in a formal participation process in Bos en Lommar. Maybe you know this area of Amsterdam, where they wanted to build an urban renovation in basically this strip here along the highway. They wanted to build many, partly social housing, partly mid-income housing, partly sold apartments. And they had a plan since 2015 already, which turned into a participatory process in 2019. And well, citizens had been involved in the decision making about that. That process was actually very well organized. They really did a lot with different sort of sessions and creative meetings and drawing together, etc. But after a year and a half, it anyway turned into a conflict where the citizens started a petition and also a protest group against that same process that then had come to an end. So the second picture is a picture of that petition and sort of the flyer of that that citizen protest, who is now protesting against the Bos en Lommer turning into a sort of concrete area. And they found me and I found them at the same time, basically, because of my contacts in Amsterdam. And they asked me, can you take a look at this process of citizen participation? Because we really think that something went wrong here. Of course, then, if you receive a question like that and you also have a project like this, you're pretty lucky, right? Because suddenly you have a lot of entrances and you get people to talk to you and you're not only searching for them. So that gave me an opportunity. So I also want to be, we have to be fair and also honest about this, because of course online ethnography is way more difficult if you don't have that existent network yet. So political ethnography for me was possible because of this network. But anyway, I had to do everything different than what I would used to do, right? Because usually I would go and observe the process in itself. I would be in the neighborhood. I would be in the meetings as the district council. I would be in these participatory sessions if they would not have already taken place. And I would do narrative interviews in the homes of people or walking around in the neighborhoods. And all of that I couldn't do anymore. So I moved the narrative interviews online. I still try to organize some walk and talk interviews because I had to see the space. And this is also why I couldn't really do this in Bogota, because first of all, my network is not strong enough there. Second, there is a language barrier, of course, which only becomes more difficult if you do it online. I mean, you can speak another language and you can learn it, but not if you have to do all the trust building and so on online. Then this language barrier becomes bigger. We come back to that later. And also the participant observations that I then did were internally in online participant observations with people in the municipality. And therefore, of course, you're even a bigger intruder than if you would be in a room, because you're sitting in your screen, they see your image like you see me now, and then you are observing people having meetings. And if this is about, topics that are quite, well, sort of sensible to these people, then you have to work towards getting there in that position. So we will get back to that when we discuss observations. And then on top of that, my research also had an action research element, because they really wanted me to evaluate their process. That evaluation was meant to also provide the municipality and the civil servants and the professionals from the housing corporation in some reflection on, okay, how can we do participation better? But it then also turned to be a topic in the final decision making in the municipal council. This actually happened 1 month ago, that my report was then used to say, okay, we cannot decide or vote for this intervention because, the participation didn't go so well. So there are several workshops now planned. The first one is tomorrow. I'm pretty nervous about it because this is the one with the civil servants, and they just read the first version of my analysis. So they might be kind of annoyed, or they might be very open to reflection. I don't know yet. But you see, there is an action element. And of course, that also requires another form of trust building, but also a very critical reflection on your own role. And especially if you have developed that role through online conversations and never in real life. So that's what I would like to talk to you about today. Let's make some time now for questions from your side to me or to Laurens, and then we can go on to this to the specific methods of observation or interviewing. But are there any like questions about what are we doing, why are we doing this, what is the goal, etc., just so that you have everything clear?
May I ask a question? It's
Elena?
Trudy.
Elena, I see, and Trudy. Okay, let's start with...
Hello?
Trudy, we hear you. You can ask your question. I think that Trudy doesn't hear us. Let's start with Elena, and then Trudy, maybe you can...
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, first of all, thanks to you both. But I wonder whether then, from your presentations, I understand that neither of you has continued with their original plan to do fieldwork, you know, in the original location. So you switched to doing fieldwork at home. Is this correct?
Laurens, I couldn't start because I had to start my case study in Bogota still. And starting is, of course, much more difficult only online. So I switched to another case study indeed, which was already part of the plan. But now I had to start with another case study. But Laurens continued in his original plan, but he adjusted it.
Yeah, basically, I was in the fortunate situation that I know these groups in Indonesia that I'm working with for quite some time. But the field work that we had intended to do was not possible. And in Nigeria, I'm far less established than I am in Indonesia. But I have a colleague who is trying to carry out that part of the research there. So yeah, we made some adjustments.
Oh, now Trudy, Trudy, we still see that you're here. Do you still want to ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I would like to ask Laurens also, what were the adjustments made? How exactly? What are you doing? And I heard you also made a comment on what you were doing on the market in front of your house, but I missed that a bit. Could you explain what you are actually doing in terms of research with that market, or did I get that wrong?
No, you did not get it wrong. In terms of the adaptations I made, I intended to speak about them. No, better to do it here actually. Basically, obviously, a lot of the participant observation that I would be carrying out usually, which is hanging around with these people, talking to them, simply looking what they are doing, that's all impossible. But you can do that to some extent online, and I'll be getting to that in a second. Because obviously for them, it's also important to have everybody know how useful and active they are. So they put it out through Facebook and so on and so forth. So there is some way of keeping track of what they say that they are doing. And that, of course, you can triangulate with others who are also present in that area and who may or may not be supporting these groups or maybe more critical of them, which obviously means that you need to have that network. So without that, it's kind of difficult. But again, for Indonesia, I have this, in which I'm fortunate. Another element which we're doing right now is that, of course, there's a large policy side to all of this. I mean, it's interesting to look at these informal militias, but even though they are informal, they have some place within the regulatory framework of the state. Finding out what that place exactly is means going through a lot of regulations and laws and stuff in order to really understand what's going on. And fortunately, that's one part of the research. But for that, you do not need to be there. Actually, it works better if you sit behind a computer or in a comfortable chair when you're reading all that stuff, because law is generally not the most exciting material to go through. And then when you have specific questions, you need access to a specialized lawyer who generally also is not there in the field, but somewhere in an office in a capital city. So that element simply has been moved a bit more to prominence than we initially intended it to be at this stage. And yes, you're right, the market is there. The market is kind of a project that came up as a result of this COVID situation. I mean, how often do we get a chance to do research in something like this? I mean, hopefully COVID is quite special and not something that is going to become normal for the next couple of decades. But what I'm doing there is basically my shopping every week. But I was finding out how people altered, some of them, their way of being in the market. Keeping distance is of course required, wearing face masks or not, talking to people or not. Some people coming at very early hours because they think that's the best time to avoid others. And obviously the sellers at the market have a choice of shutting down because they fear COVID or remaining open because they prefer to do that. And actually none of them shut down. So I was quite intrigued in finding out what's going on in terms of a market as a social space under these circumstances. But that's simply also to keep myself entertained to some extent and do some research in real life other than solely behind this computer of mine. Sorry, that was a long answer, but...
Thanks, Laurens. That was very clear. But the research in Utrecht has nothing to do with your own research topic in, so to say, Nigeria or Indonesia.
No, it hasn't. It has to do with me and with kind of staying sane as a researcher.
Yeah.
And finding out that if plan A doesn't work, maybe there can be a plan B in its...
Yeah. I think that sounds as a great idea. I will think about that, what I can do in my area. I'm living in a small village, so what's out here? What can be interesting? Good, thank you.
Are there any more questions at this moment? I don't see. I would propose that we then go on to the second theme, that is observations, which is large part of both their research and also relevant probably for the others. Maybe you can share start the PDF again, Nanke?
Is it still there? I never stopped sharing it. You don't see it anymore?
No, I have it. I had all the faces before it. Yes, okay, then we turn to you, Nanke. Yeah.
Okay, so what did it mean to move ethnographic observations to an online situation, right? So I try to list here what I would usually do in regular ethnographic observations. And that is, of course, the goal of that is to immerse in a social setting for an extended period of time and to make regular observations of the behavior of members of that setting. So this goal, it already changed, of course, because I really wondered, how can I immerse in a setting if I am not physically there? And you know, also maybe from your own ethnographic work, that the whole embodied experience of, you know, feeling a situation, getting to know people, but even the smells or the surrounding, and in participatory processes, very much the sort of performative element of the situation. Like, for example, is there a stage with chairs, or is it round tables, or is it a sort of walk-in situation? Is very important for understanding how municipal actors are organizing these things and how inclusive they think these situations will be. So for that, of course, you cannot really do that. You cannot observe these things online. Another of my usual goals to do ethnographic fieldwork is to sort of reveal hidden processes. For example, forms of inner exclusion that you cannot really ask people about, or that you cannot see if you are not present, or also forms of agency of citizens that they don't talk about because for them it is the most normal thing on earth, but that they perform in the way that they interact with institutional actors. And of course, these are also things that I could no longer then observe if I wouldn't be there present in seeing them doing these protests or talking to civil servants, etc. So the city from an eye level perspective, looking at the city like this instead of from a top-down view, which of course the planning students in my department usually do, seeing maps and plans from the top, from a helicopter perspective, is what my main goal is for ethnographic work. And also, what is that eye level perspective if we do that through a screen, right? So what did I do? What are my tips for making this still somehow possible, but of course with all the challenges that I just mentioned? Well, first, I think what is very important is to think through, are you really looking at a screen, at social interactions? So, for example, are you looking at a meeting between citizens, or is it a borrel or a sort of fun activity that you're all observing? Because they still take place, and they take place online. Probably you're having some. Or is it an institutional interaction that you're observing? And I think I did both. I observed some interactions where citizens were talking to each other about the next plans of their protest, but I also observed how institutional actors were reflecting on the participatory process. And taking such a goal, sort of unit of analysis, is important to also see, okay, what are you going to look for then? What are you going to make your notes about? And what are are you including the background or not? Are you including what they are drinking or eating or not? So that really, gives you insights on how much detail you're going to include. Also, of course, the access to these situations depends highly on your existing network, like we already just said. Laurens was able to do this in Indonesia, but not in Nigeria. I was able to do this in Amsterdam, but not in Bogota, for, well, reasons we just mentioned. Also, I think that if you are observing either social interactions or institutions, when you are entering into that situation, usually as an ethnographer, you already have a lot of work building trust, right? You really have to explain very clearly, what are you going to do? Why are you there? Are you going to keep everything anonymous? All these, basic trust building things that you do in ethnographic work become only more important if you do them online. Because people, they don't know you. They also don't know what you're going to do there. And they are also not sure, are you recording this? Is their face in the picture? What about anonymity if you are recording that? So having very clear agreements with everybody there is important. So you need more time to do that prep work, basically, before you can start the observation. Unit of analysis I already mentioned. And then another thing is, of course, that online observations are much more about language than about all the other things that we do. I mean, I'm making some hand movements here, but this is not really helping you. Basically, the only thing that helps you understand what I'm saying is listening to what I'm saying. So the linguistic element is now even more important. And that makes it more difficult, of course, to do this in a second or a third language. And also it makes it more important to literally quote the things that people say. So usually in your ethnographic work, you might not write down literal quotes because you're not sitting there with your, to observe situations. But now you might be able to do that, and you might be even able to record it. So because you need the language in order to understand what this is really about. So note-taking is another type of exercise I experienced, and is much more literal, basically. And another aspect of that is also that when you are in a social situation and you see people behave in a certain way, you can always go afterwards to talk to them about that situation, so that you don't only have your own observations, but you also have the people's reflection on this. And that is now also increasingly more difficult because you have to make a separate appointment for that. And that usually also creates a situation that they don't really know what you're talking about anymore, because you're in another setting then, and then you're asking something about, hey, what happened there? Can you explain? Can you describe that situation? And they're like, which situation? Because everything is somehow the same, we're all looking at the screen, at each other's faces. It's hard to really divide different interactions in the larger interaction. So in order to ask questions about that, your notes also have to be very specific. What was the topic and how did you respond? How did it feel that they responded to you like that? Is even more specific and detailed if you are asking these things about online settings, I think. That was it. Then I go to the slide of Laurens.
Or maybe one proposal, Nanke, since you have told so much, shared so much information, maybe it's good to ask if someone wants to ask a question to you immediately. Maybe some practical problems that you envision other researchers.
Yeah, or maybe you have been yourself in such a situation and you encountered similar problems or different problems.
Are there any questions at the moment? It was super clear, Nanke, I think.
I see Sonia putting her hand up.
Okay, great. Yes, Sonia.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear the presentation. I wanted to ask how you got access, and if you think that access is more difficult in these times. I am also asking because I work with quite vulnerable populations, and then I find that access now is a whole other level of difficult than when you could meet physically. So yeah, thank you.
Totally. And especially ethnographically, you would run into people on the street, right? Or in situations, and that's now not happening. So you really have to, that's why I'm emphasizing that sort of existing network. It is sad, but you need that. I mean, of course, I didn't know all the people I talked to, but I knew the people in the municipality. They were interested in me doing this project. So they gave me the access to their internal meetings. And the citizens were also really, eager to have me analyze that situation because they are so angry. They wanted me basically to stop it, to stop the planning. So, which of course I cannot do. That's not in my power. But indeed, the access is very important. And I received that access because of earlier work I did on similar topics. So basically via a network. And what I did in building the access with these people in this particular case, because I knew 2 or 3 people, and of course there were like 45 people involved, is I really wrote an email where I explained exactly my situation. I explained that I was not paid by the municipality to do this. I explained that I am an independent scholar, to make this all very clear, so that people, that you start from a transparent situation where people can trust that you're not there for a specific objective. But that was very important. And last thing I wanted to say, I also, of course, had to interview people from the neighborhood who were less vocal and who were also, many from a migration background. And there the interviews also went really differently, but we will come to interviews later. And there the part on trust building in the interview setting was really half of the interview, basically, before I could even go into the topic. But we will get to that when we speak about interviewing in a minute.
Thank you.
Yes, interviewing is indeed the last theme, but before that will be later. I saw that Marike also has a question.
Yeah, I have a more general question, but I think that perhaps it comes up when we go to talking about interviewing. So thank you so much for sharing so far what you've done. I think it's super interesting and inspirational. My question is about your ethics protocol, whether, when you changed to these different strategies, did you write a new ethics protocol? Should we encourage people to do a new ethics clearance with the AISSR ethics committee? Or, I see you have it here also on the slide, Nanke, these questions about anonymity, what it will be used for. So you've given all this some thought already, but I think that's my general question about the ethical aspects, but maybe that also comes up as we go on to talk about interviewing.
Well, I can answer quickly now because, of course, this is such a, whether you have to go through a new ethics clearance, I don't know, because look, I make a distinction between sort of in situ ethics and ethics in advance, basically. And the ethics in advance, of course, changed slightly. Because there it's about what kind of rules do I live up to in terms of anonymity, and how I find people, and how I discuss my notes with them, and whether they can respond to my research, etc. But the in situ ethics that come up while you're doing research, they are basically much more influential on the way that I do my research, and also in the reflection on my ethical questions. And there you usually can do very little with an ethics committee. That is really something you are doing while you are in the field. So I would say, and these are also much more sort of challenged when you turn online. The things you can imagine in advance are pretty clear, but while you are online, suddenly things happen. Those, I would say what would be helpful maybe for the AISSR is to have not an ethics committee who checks it in advance, but have also the ethics committee talk to researchers while they are in the field to get some sort of tips. And they are then not so much about the rules, but more about how do you deal with unexpected situations. That I think that would be very helpful to do, especially when the whole situation of the research changes.
Okay, thank you, Nanke. Time-wise, I would propose now to go to Laurens, as he will share his experiences about observations. So I give you the word, Laurens.
Thank you. Well, basically, I mean, after this excellent slide by Nanke, there's not that much that I have to add, because a lot of the stuff that she spoke on is are experiences which I encountered as well. Interestingly, I think there are two things which maybe are useful to add on this. And already I mentioned that basically one of the important things with observations in real life would be that you can see what people actually do in addition to what they say that they are doing. And that's a lot harder digitally. I mean, I mentioned that I can get a lot of information through Facebook, through stuff which they put on the internet. But of course, that is stuff which they put on there, which they control. They decide pretty much what you see as an observer. And that definitely is a difference that we somehow need to take into account. What you have access to is a lot more limited. On the other hand, of course, we're not the only ones with this. This goes for everybody, and let's say life in general at this moment. And that means that, like Nanke just mentions, these meetings that you were in, here I'm very much experiencing the same thing. But curiously, in Indonesia, digital meetings have really taken a tremendous flight. All sorts of meetings which would usually have been in real life are now being digitalized as well, simply because notably those militias and the government elements affiliated with them, they, to some extent, they derive their importance and their legitimacy from being visible. So a lot of this is actually still going on. And to me as a researcher, this is really actually quite a nice situation, because previously, if there was a meeting and I would want to attend, I would need to travel half the world, get there, be there on time, and so on and so forth. And by now, it's more a matter of simply logging on and being part of this meeting that takes place half a world away from where I actually am. The main difficulty now is the difference in time zone, which is not too horrid usually. What's also interesting is that for them, I'm also becoming more interesting, because like we follow on the news what's going on in Indonesia, they also follow what's going on in Europe. And you may recall that in January, we had these COVID-inspired riots for a couple of days. And those really hit headlines in much of Asia, because it was so special that such a thing was happening in Europe. So some of them affiliated to a local university asked me like, hey, what's going on? And can you come and tell us about it? So basically through that militia, which had university lecturers as their members, I got approached to give a lecture at their university, which I then did, which then again put me into contact with several people whom I did not know as yet, who were also working on this from an Indonesian perspective. So in that sense, there's rather a lot going on that is unusual, but in which the circumstances actually allow for new, unexpected meetings that would not have taken place otherwise. And I guess that's also something to tie into with the questions of ethics, because that's something I was also thinking about. How does that work out? And to some extent, it also makes things easier. Imagine if, as a researcher, you are somewhere, you are observing a meeting. Most people there know who you are and what it is that you're doing, but perhaps some people came late and you were not introduced to them. And they start telling a lot of things and making interesting comments, which you think like, ooh, I want to do something with this because it's very illustrative. But of course, they don't know who you are. So in that sense, that would be something that you would then need to deal with later on. Like, by the way, you said this, hi, I'm here. In these type of meetings, this seems to be much less of an issue, specifically because people quite simply, quite earlier on, see that you're there, see what it is that you're doing, usually because when I'm there, I tend to repeat, hi, I'm this and this person, I'm here for this and this reason. If that's okay with you, I will listen, but I'm not recording, blah, 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 blah. And if there's something specific I would like to get back to you, if that's okay, then I will send you an email. And I put a message like that in the chat, and everyone who walks in or out can see that at some point. But you would never do that in a real meeting. That would be a bit like sitting with a sign above your head with all that text. That just doesn't work. But in the digital environment, it's also a bit of an artificial way, but it's more fitting. And it seems to facilitate contact quite a lot easier. And let's leave it at that. That's the important stuff about observations for the digital sphere.
Thank you, Laurens. Are there any questions to Laurens at this point? Okay, then we go to the last theme. Let me see, is Nanke there firstly presenting, or Laurens? Nanke, yeah. Yes, I give you the word.
If you want, Laurens, do you want to swap?
No, it's perfectly fine. I mean, you got a more extensive slide, so that.
I put more words in. Yeah, I'm sorry. There is somebody redoing the apartment upstairs, so I went looking for another place in the apartment because they are drilling. But well, maybe you hear some drilling in the background. Okay, now let's talk about online interviewing. Then, what are the differences, right, between online and regular interviewing? Well, I did the same thing again. I wrote down what is important to me in regular interviewing and how that then changes when you do that online. So in regular interviewing, of course, you have to have a very clear goal of the interview. Are you looking for just information, or are you looking for opinions, experience, ideographic stories, experiences of places and spaces? Are you looking for the way people emotionally experience things? Are you looking for description between formal and informal roles, which of course is in an interview very important, because formal roles you can read usually in documents, but informal roles is something you can really discuss in an interview. And of course, behaviors and encounters, and the descriptions of behaviors of people and others, and the encounters that people have amongst each other. Yeah, here's the drilling. So now, you of course, you need a very clear, and it's usually a mixture of these different goals. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Because the apartment is like shaking, but okay. Besides having goals, of course, you also do a portion of sampling there. So who are you talking to and why are you talking to these people? And in case study research, you usually do purposive sampling. So you pick a specific person for a specific reason because they have a certain role, or they can represent a certain community, or they have a certain experience or whatsoever. And yeah, here again, like before, you have an introduction where you make agreements about anonymity, how you quote, how you read, how you allow them to maybe read the transcript before you use it, how you will publish, and also how you will use that kind of information in general. Now, I think all these things stay the same, but they slightly differ when you do this online. I think it is even more important to rethink the goal critically, because if you just want opinions, for example, about something, usually interviewing is not even a very handy method anyway, right? Because interviewing you do with a small n, with a small proportion of people. And what a couple of people think about something, you know, what their opinion is usually, yeah, not worth much if it doesn't give you a broader story. So there, probably a survey is much more equipped and much better serving your interest. And I think if you are doing online interviews, you should never do an interview that is not totally necessary. So think through what the goal is. If it's just getting information, again, there, why would you do that really via an interview? You could get information online, you can get information in documents. So if it's just an expert who wrote, for example, a paper about this, why would you interview him or her? And I think, yeah, that's important to do, because interviewing should be really used online for these extra purposes of getting information that you otherwise would not be able to receive about experiences, about emotions, about informal roles, about encounters that can be described by the people. Then sampling. Also, sampling is, of course, important as always, but especially online, I don't see why you would do a sort of representative sample if you do interviewing online. I think the more important interviews are the ones that are specifically necessary with that specific purpose and with that specific person. So purposive sampling there, if you have a purposive sample, then you probably also have a good reason to really do an online interview. Then third, the introduction, like with observations, is even more important. Well, because you have to build this trust relationship throughout the interview, and you're not there in person. So you cannot use, you know, your physicality to make people somehow like you or trust you, or yeah, you know, that you feel sort of another level of empathy growing there. You have to do that now through a camera with your words. And I think one way of doing that is very nicely framed by Weiss in his book on interviewing. He says, interviewing is a partnership. And so it's not you who is the expert and you're interviewing a person who knows, who you want to get some information from, but it's really a partnership in bringing out a story together. And Weiss basically argues that you should try to sort of balance the power dynamic in an interview by stating very clearly that this other person is in fact the expert, and that they can tell you things that you would otherwise not know, and that they have all the knowledge about their situation or their role or their institution or their community or their physical space, and that you are going to help this person bringing out that knowledge, so that this situation also becomes somehow fun for this other person. It's nice to talk about the things you know about. It's nice to talk about your experiences if the interviewee really helps to bring out these aspects of the life of that person that you interview. So that trust building, I think, could be really nicely framed through that lens. And then practically, I think it's very important to also adjust your item list or your question list to these online situations. So if you are online, the questions have to be even more clear. Also, don't ask one question that is in fact two questions, which, I mean, if I have my students write up their interview questions, it happens almost half of the time that their one question is in fact two questions, and that, you know, creates this even more sort of difficult situation online. And also try to avoid questions that have inherent assumptions. This is, of course, something you should always try to avoid in an interview, but here even more, because if you frame it really as a partnership, then questions with an inherent assumption break that sort of balance immediately. It breaks, as you know, it's a trust relationship. It breaks that the other feels, oh, hey, oh, so she already knows what I'm really, you know, how it's going to be, or what I'm really thinking about this. So try to really look critically at your item list or your question list to see if there are maybe questions in there like this. And then I think in an online interview that is framed as a partnership, follow-up questions, specifying questions are even more important. So really, what do you mean? Or can you explain what happened there? Or can you bring me back to that situation and describe it to me? Also structuring questions so that the interviewee has the experience that you know what you're talking about and that you have well prepared. So saying, okay, this topic has finished now. I would like to move on to that topic, so that there is a sort of, you know, calm situation there where the person feels, okay, this is well prepared. She knows what she's talking about. And I can, you know, I am valued here as for my time. And of course, the topic of silence. Dare to be silent, and especially online, this is awkward, but it usually allows a person to, you know, say more, and in their own words, and also in a way that they would like to frame it themselves. So daring to be silent, I think, is a very important aspect of doing a good online interview. Also to give the space to formulate the things that they want in a certain way. And of course, at the very end, you can share how you interpreted some of the things, which also then again builds that trust relationship, which usually you do maybe after an interview more informally, you sort of after talk. Now you also make time to do this after talk online so that this person has the experience that you heard them, that you acknowledge them, and that you that they can even also tell you, no, that's not what I meant. So these are all sorts of checkup methods to do in an online interview to make that whole experience, I think more inclusive, but also more valuable to both of you, both the interviewee and the interviewer. Okay, I will go to the slide of Laurens.
Yeah, thanks, Nanke. I only have a few additional remarks to add to this comprehensive slides, possibly a bit pointing out a bit of the influence of the people you want to talk to in this to some extent. Because obviously as a researcher, you want to talk to somebody, but it doesn't mean that that person is specifically wanting to talk to you. Quite likely they do not know that you exist until the moment that you try and contact them in order to talk to them. And to some extent it also means that, well, beggars can't be choosers. They have a lot of say as to when it's happening, how it's exactly going to happen. I mean, I mentioned this briefly, but there's a time difference between the Netherlands and Indonesia of 6 to 7 hours. If somebody says that they can talk to me at 9 o'clock in the morning, their time, if I really want to talk to that person, then obviously, yes, I'm going to say yes. Although that means that for me, it will be 2 o'clock in the morning. But I've done it a few times, and it really is a worthwhile way of interacting. Also because then, as Nanke points out, there's also some small talk going on in these matters. And at some point it will come to the fore that we'll say, well, we have a time difference. Oh, really? Do you? Oh, yeah. So what time is it with you? 2 o'clock in the morning. 2 o'clock in the morning? You're talking to me now? I say, yeah. Ooh, well, okay. So it helps also to show people that you appreciate that they take the opportunity to talk to you. And in that sense, one thing that may also come to the fore is the position of the person that you're talking with. I mean, Nanke mentioned experts, but in many situations, notably also with these militias, there's such a thing as status. If you want to talk to a major commander, for instance, it may take a couple of efforts before the person actually deigns to to reply to your email or finds the time to do so, which is obviously also the case. And which will mean that you need to make a concerted effort to actually get through to that person's agenda. Sometimes it really is a matter of them, at least I know from experience that with these type of groups, it can be a matter of them showing their importance by not answering your emails first time, second time, only perhaps the third time. But of course, in other contexts, people are also just seriously busy. So if you want to talk to somebody digitally, you send them an email or a message and they don't reply, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to. It doesn't even mean it's a status thing. It can just be that they are very occupied by other stuff. And then I always tend to assume like, okay, you probably have read my message, maybe not, but you don't know yet what you're missing out on. So I'm going to ask again. And then by the time that you literally say no, then I'll accept that you want. But until then, I just assume that you have been too busy to reply. And in that sense, access obviously always is important. And again, to give an example, that's why I put this picture on. The guy on the left here with his finger raised is one of my major contacts. I've known him for 10, 12 years. He is digitally savvy to the extent that he's very good at Facebook, that he sends text messages, but he does not do WhatsApp and he doesn't do Zoom. He just doesn't do it. Basically because Zoom is not that big within the groups that he works with. And in Indonesia, WhatsApp is one of the competitors with some other messenger services, which means that he prefers those over others. That means that I, as a researcher, if I want to talk to him or want to get, I need to adapt my methods of contact to what he is using. Otherwise, simply, he's not going to use WhatsApp because I want to. It's just me wanting something from him. So I need to adapt in that sense. And possibly it's also important to realize that while this is a different way of working for many of us, and many people keep pointing out that this is the new normal, to some extent, that is true. It's not only us who are getting new contacts through digital ways, it's pretty much all of the world. So in that sense, it's not just people who are contacted by us as researchers, by email, by Skype, or what sort of messages we may be using to talk to them. It's also colleagues. It's also other people who, for one reason or another, want to talk to them. So this digitalization of what usually be more direct social contact is something that has taken place throughout global society. And that means that as odd as it might feel to us that we're using these methods, it's not as odd as it might seem, because everybody is doing it for everything. And that is something that we tend to forget sometimes, but that's important to keep in mind. It may feel strange, but it's strange to everybody. And because it's strange to everybody, it becomes something that is more normal almost. And one final thing to point out in this, and I'm just going to do it because I had that experience this morning. Nanke very nicely put out the things to do and not to do in the conversation. But another element is where your camera is. I mean, all of us are looking more or less at our camera, which is likely above our screens. But this morning I had a conversation with somebody, an expert as it happens, whose camera was on the side. So I was talking to him, but I only saw him like this. And he was talking like this all the time. And that is very strange. It seems that he's doing something completely different and just having me as a sideshow. But turns out he had two screens and he saw me on the screen in front of him and his camera was on the other one. And that made me realize again that yes, it is important. If it's a real conversation, you want to look somebody in the eyes or at least in the face. But yeah, cameras to that extent also have quite some influence. And that also, I mean, Nanke pointed it out, the way in which you can use your body language or your physical language. I mean, again, this is not ideal, but this is a step up from just by telephone when you only have a voice and where you need to make all your expressions of surprise and encouragement and so on by putting in vocal noises. In this way, you can still use your hands like Nanke did, or you can smile, or you can raise your eyebrows, or use your eyes, and so on and so forth. You can still do quite a lot to keep a conversation socially active. Yeah, let me stop here, basically.
Thank you, Laurens. I have a proposal. Yes, we can go to the breakout rooms in a little while. There's also a question from Ximing Fan, but I want to propose that this is asked in one of the breakout groups. So if everyone can send me the name of the researcher that you have a question for, if you have, then I can set up the breakout groups and we can have a small break of 5 minutes and then we can go to breakout rooms. Okay, so I'm happy to hear. Thank you. So we come back in 5 minutes and you can think about a question in the meantime.
Hey Lotte.
Hey.
Ja, echt niet normaal. Maar hoorde je het goed, dat boren?
Ja, maar niet de hele tijd en we konden je goed verstaan. Was voor jou het lastigst, denk ik.
Ja, echt irritant. Echt gewoon zo. Het is een betonnen gebouw dit. En het is 2 verdiepingen hierboven. Maar ze zijn echt in de betonnen muren aan het...
Ja.
Dus alles trilt gewoon. Ja.
Ja, wij horen dat nauwelijks. Het is, ik woon denk ik in net zo'n soort gebouw als jij. En ik had dat vorige week. En ik had college. En ik dacht van shit, dat gaat helemaal niet. Maar de studenten hadden zoiets van ja, er zoomt iets bij je. Maar verder... Maar ik zat inderdaad...
Ja, ik ga ook gewoon naar kantoor zo. Ik kan hier niet werken.
Nee, dat zou ik maar doen.
Ja. Want,
ik zie trouwens dat er best een aantal mensen al... allemaal positieve reacties. Maar dat ze dus ook een aantal al weg moesten.
Ja. Maakt niet
Ja,
uit.
er zijn er 2 die hebben aangegeven graag met vragen nog te hebben voor Laurens. En dan hadden we dus in de chat nog die vraag van Ximing van aan jullie beiden. Ik stel eigenlijk voor om gewoon in 1 groep dan nu te blijven.
Ja joh, prima.
Ja, lijkt me ook. Ja.
En dan zien we wel of er nog een gesprek komt.
Het is vaak ook wel leuk. Volgens mij, ik vond het nou ook Nanke. Ik bedoel, we vullen elkaar best wel aan in dingen die we doen en zeggen. En dat lijkt me bij vragen ook wel.
Ja, lijkt me goed. Laten we gewoon bij elkaar blijven.
Ja. Ik vond het echt mooi trouwens, zo geordend als jij dat allemaal had uitgeschreven. Van dit zou ik gewoonlijk doen en nu doe ik het zo.
Ja,
Ja.
jij bent echt een
Ik dacht,
teacher.
even, want anders ga ik allerlei dingen zeggen. Maar ik weet natuurlijk niet of iedereen hetzelfde perspectief heeft op wat überhaupt interview is. Weet je wel.
Ik kan het wel delen misschien met de deelnemers. Dat jullie dat
Ja.
vinden.
Zet het wel even in een documentje. Dan kan Laurens ook nog aanvullen.
Helemaal goed. Ja. Even kijken. Ik heb niet precies getimed, dus de 5 minuten zijn wel om, hè, ongeveer.
Ja hoor.
Okay. Welcome. Some people had to leave the meeting. So since we are in a smaller group, I decided that we stay in this group. So you can just ask your question to both or to one of, to Laurens or to Nanke. I still have this question from Ximing Fan, and she is in a quiet zone of a study room. So I think you can also see his or her question. There is the question. I'll go back to the question. It's a bit on top.
I put it on the screen.
Sorry?
Do you see it? I put it in the screen.
Yeah, I also have it here. You mean the question in the chat. I have a question for you both. In a digital meeting, I think that it would be difficult in a sense that you cannot interrupt the meeting and ask question to a certain person. That is Nanke or Laurens, can you respond to that? Do you have a tip?
I see a different question in my chat.
Oh, really?
Well, there's that one, and there's a rejoinder to it that says, how do you approach a certain person or people in a virtual meeting? Is that the one you see, Nanke?
I see, do you speak English?
That's not a one. That's no. But if you go up, you will find the one that Lotte just read out.
Okay.
I mean, I can just answer it first and then you can join to that. I think, yeah, thanks for that question, Ximing. My guess is that it depends a bit on the type of meeting that you're in. If it's a Zoom that allows for chat, then things are excellent because then you can just send a chat message to that specific person. And in that sense, then it becomes a bit like a real meeting in which you can also informally talk to people, which you would then do during the breaks. But now you can informally talk to them while the presentation is going on because nobody else is bothered if you send a chat. That is providing, of course, you address it only to the one person you want to talk to. If, however, it's not a digital meeting that has a chat or discussion function turned on for participants, then the one thing I tend to do is I tend to note down the name of the person that I would want to ask a question for, and then try and find them on internet. And usually you can do that works out. If it's somebody in a university or whatever, you can find an email address or LinkedIn or Facebook. And then you send a message through there like saying, oh, I noticed you there and there, and I was interested in what you said, and I wanted to ask a bit more about blah, blah, blah. And most of the time that works. Sometimes I don't get any reaction at all, but then I just suppose that I wasn't using the proper address. And of course, again, it's me wanting something from them. That doesn't mean that they necessarily want to join. But usually people are happy enough to respond.
People like contact, as you say.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that, but I think that's really true. Even in times like this, people quite often are interested. If somebody comes by and said, oh, I'm intrigued by what you said or what you're doing. If you approach somebody as an expert or something, usually people will be happy to engage in a conversation.
Thank you, Laurens. Let's give a moment to Ximen to respond if there is an additional question to this.
Ximen says, thank you, Laurens, that is very helpful.
Yeah, I see.
I find it really interesting, Laurens, because for me, during the digital meeting, I decided that I would not at all send personal messages to anyone in that meeting because they were, you know, active in that meeting, doing their job mostly, or you know. So I thought if I'm now going to interrupt, then I basically, you know, take them off of what they are supposed to be doing. So I did the same as you, like, you know, I looked up their name and I've sent them an email afterwards, but also because of ethical reasons, because I thought, yeah, you know, they're in that meeting. So if I would be in a room where they were having a vergadering, a meeting, I would also not, you know, go up to one person. And so I try to avoid it, but it's interesting. So you did that and it was not a problem at all.
Mm. It might also be a contextual thing. I mean, most of the meetings that I'm referring to now are meetings taking place in an Indonesian context, which usually are a bit looser to begin with. And I think you're referring to a Dutch governmental context, which indeed is rather strictly organized.
Yeah.
And in one of those, I would also not send me an immediate text to somebody like, "Oh, that was interesting. Can I talk to you about it later on?"
No.
No, and then I would also go for indeed the email afterwards. But it's a contextual thing.
Contextual thing, yeah.
Yes. Marie has her hand raised.
Yes, I had questions for both actually, and also debating a little bit with myself about, do you think there is time or situation where you choose not to engage in kind of online ethnographic fieldwork? I'm thinking, in my case, I started my PhD during Corona time, so I have no previous contact with anyone, and I'm also very afraid of the impact of starting online fieldwork on the future of my research, starting with the person that are the most accessible online. It can also, I don't know, influence a little bit how I engage with a specific field that I don't know in person. It's not very clear, but that's the kind of question that I'm asking myself, and I'd be very interested to know what are your thoughts about it.
I would like to respond because I had exactly this problem when I started. This was so for me also, and I forgot to mention it. It's a very good question because it was in the end the municipality who wanted me to do this thing. And then the municipality, they said to me, yeah, you can start interviewing with our, you know, colleagues right away. And then I thought, no, if I do that, the citizens will not trust me. They will not talk to me anymore. You know, it will start from their perspective. And it's, as you say from experience, we know that if you basically have to usually try to start with the group that is most difficult to reach, also as a sort of symbolic gesture that you find them so important. And it's not even symbolic, it is real, you know, they are so important. So then I had to battle a little bit with the municipality saying, I don't want to start with you guys. I want to start with the citizens. And then through the citizens, I got to know the citizens who are more difficult to reach and also who didn't have Zoom, for example. So I had to call them via the phone because they had no experience using Zoom, because they were not ever in online meetings like this. So I think I took the same approach as that I would offline, of basically taking the most difficult to reach group, or maybe even the most marginalized group in that setting, as the first, and to really invest in that connection first. Otherwise, yeah, you basically cut your own fingers. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds quite familiar. In that sense, doing digital work is somewhat more tricky, specifically in building up trust and specifically in the way that you can or cannot approach somebody. I mean, there's this one group in Nigeria who we really have advised as being part of this research. they're a nomadic group basically, but they're armed and they tend to fight both Boko Haram and at times also the official army. But they're not that much on Zoom, and they're not that well connected via WhatsApp or anything. And they're definitely our group who you need to meet in person. And obviously I'm also not the best person to go and meet them for such a thing. So that's really something that my Nigerian colleagues would need to instigate. But of course that can't be done right now. So that means we simply decided to leave them out of the picture for the time being, and hopefully establish contact with them when things are a bit more easy. But that's something a group we simply can't approach at the moment.
Yes, Monique.
Hi, thank you. I had some specific questions for Lawrence, but also Nanke, if you have any insight, I'd love to hear as well. I'm also working as a junior researcher at the GPIO department at the UvA, and I'm doing a qualitative study at the moment on the experiences of people using public transportation and working in fields of public transit at this time, and have been grappling with a lot of the questions of research ethics and doing field work at this time. And I'm meant to be starting the field work this week. And Lawrence, your study on kind of investigating or exploring people's experiences and behaviors in open markets in Utrecht is interesting for me, because I wonder how you are negotiating, because you say in your slide people like contact, but in this context of COVID, people may not be wanting close contact and close proximity to others as much. So how do you negotiate that in the times of COVID? And also, how do you navigate building trust in interactions that are so fleeting and so temporary and momentary?
Yeah.
And sorry, one more note. Nanke, I read your chapter in Seeing the City, and it's incredibly helpful and informative. So just thank you for that. I really loved it.
Yeah, thanks, Monique. Those are really relevant questions. And actually, there were questions which I still am thinking about to some extent. And initially also, my idea was with this research, like, well, I'm going to base it on observations, because I can't go and talk to people under these circumstances. But the interesting thing with that market is, of course, it's an open space. It's a social space. Everybody can come there, and quite a lot of people do, basically. What I started to find is that a lot of people who come there actually do not just come there for shopping. And I realized that is something that happened before as well, but I never really paid it attention. There are people who come there simply because there are other people who come to meet others, have a coffee, have small chats about things. And usually when it's a market under normal circumstances, they do not stand out, but they do now. And you notice that there are homeless people who come there, elderly who perhaps have no family, or for instance, one of my neighbors is a widower. He spends quite some time at the market, talking to people who he knows there. And once this started becoming clear to me, I also started to realize that quite often when you're at the market and when you're waiting until it's your turn, people actually start to talk to you. Usually small chat, but I mean, small chat generally is what I'm interested in to begin with. And this time I'm not looking for interviews of 1.5 hours on detailed stuff. I want to know why people are there, what they're doing, and how they are engaging with these notions of COVID. And of course, it's a matter of keeping distance. Initially, I thought that, well, I should definitely wear a face mask and everything. But then doing that, people tend to look at me rather awkwardly, because people who want to wear face masks and who are really worried about COVID do not go to the market at the moment. It's more people who think like, well, this is an open space, you need to keep your distance, and all shall be well, basically, who actually visit the market and go around there. And basically what I'm doing is I'm keeping myself to the rules as put up by the municipality. By the way, the municipality is also quite interested in what I'm finding, because they also want to know, like, who are these people, and does them, and actually that gave a second layer of questions, like, does this being at the market, or there being a market, does it contribute to the well-being of people, in addition to simply offering an opportunity to buy foodstuff? And I think that this well-being element is an element that is very strongly coming to the fore now, notably for people for whom it is kind of like a social meeting, as limited as it is, which they otherwise would not be having. But I guess that in a sense, a market is easier for this than public. Well, maybe not. I mean, I was going to say a market is, of course, it's static. It's in one place and people walk around. But of course, public transport, if you have the stops, it's the same thing. Those are also static.
Right.
But yeah, now I'm starting to think about your research for you. That's not what I should be doing, I guess. But no, basically, I mean, my first idea was, can I do this actually? And I thought, yeah, I can, because I'm going there anyway, because I do my shopping there, and that's fully in line with all the rules. And when I'm there and when I know this place, there's nothing wrong with having a look around, and then waiting in line and having people talk to me and talking to some people according to the social morals of that place. It's yeah, that works. What I'm not doing, obviously, is spending whole days there, particularly when and I'm not really trying to be in the thick of the crowd, because yeah, that is kind of looking for things you do not want to be looking for. But
so are you wearing a face mask while doing this research, or you're realizing that that's inhibiting the ability to approach people?
It's an off and on thing, basically. Specifically early in the morning, when there are people who want to come to the market but who are worried about COVID, that's a time to wear a face mask, because those people will wear them as well. But later on in the day, when nobody's wearing a face mask, then it comes across as rather awkward if you are the only one walking around with a face mask and asking them whether they are worried about COVID.
Right.
So then generally I do not. But then, of course, the thing is, again, to keep distance from people.
Right, absolutely. In my case, I think that will be less of a thing that I can negotiate, because in spaces of public transit, that will be mandatory.
Yeah, and I guess that's actually a good thing, because it makes it less of an issue. Whereas at market, I had it a few times that I was wearing a face mask, and I was like, yeah, it's nice, we can go here, even though COVID. Oh, well, you must be very worried because you're wearing a face mask, blah, blah, blah. And which, of course, wasn't really, but people really took issue at me wearing one of those.
Thank you.
My pleasure. It would be nice to hear something as to what you're finding at some point, if you feel like it.
Yeah, I'm doing my research with the Urban Mobility Futures research group at the UvA, and we're starting the fieldwork this week. So
yeah, really nice.
Excited, and hopefully we'll hear something of that soon. Yeah,
no, for sure. Yeah.
I see Anastasia and Bernardo still present. Do you have a question for Nanke or Laurens? Or Marie and Monique or Ximing? I think you have asked your question.
Yes, good for me. Thank you for answering. Great. By the way, it's good to know that other researchers are experiencing the same kind of reflection and struggle.
Yes, that was one of the goals also of this seminar, to bring the community together a bit and look for some best practices, some practical tips, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you for hosting. This was incredibly helpful and informative.
Great, thank you for being here and your questions.
Yeah, thanks for coming by. It's really nice to talk to some people.
To have contact. Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much. I think I can close it up. And yes, thank you, Laurens. Thank you, Nanke, of course, for preparing and presenting. And I'd like to see you on the next seminar. There is one already next week, I think. but you will receive the invite like the other times. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good day, all.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
You too.
Bye.